Early one morning in October 2022, police in Aurora, Colorado, responded to a 911 call from the ex-girlfriend of 21-year-old Joseph Castorena. 4 of the woman's family members had been shot during a home invasion by Castorena, including her father, 51-year-old Jesus Serrano, her sister, 22-year-old Maria Anita Serrano, Maria's husband, 21-year-old Kenneth Eugene Greene Luque, and a neighbor, 59-year-old Rodolfo Salgado Perez. All 4 victims died from their injuries, while Castorena's ex-girlfriend survived by hiding in a bathroom with her 2 nieces. By the time police arrived, Castorena had slipped out of sight. Chilling surveillance footage showed the suspect casing the family's home before he broke in and lay in wait for the victims to return from a party. The killings came amid an ongoing domestic violence situation between the suspect and his ex-girlfriend. Just a week earlier, the woman had applied for an order of protection, stating in her application that Castorena was controlling and would hit her if she didn't listen to him. She also accused him of keeping her away from her family. Her father also applied for a protective order, claiming that Castorena had threatened to kill members of the family. The judge granted both orders and scheduled a hearing for a permanent order, which would have occurred 5 days after the killings. Castorena was arrested more than a month later in the Mexican state of Aguascalientes, following a multi-agency manhunt involving the FBI, the Aurora Police Department's fugitive unit, and Mexican authorities. His brother and a cousin also faced charges for aiding in his escape. In May of 2024, an Arapahoe County jury found Castorena guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 18. Nenad Milosevich. One Florida man was apparently so determined to get his girlfriend the perfect Christmas gift that he was willing to kill in order to get his hands on it. 56-year-old Nenad Milosevich was arrested on suspicion of murder after 73-year-old jeweler Anthony D'Amore was found dead at his business in Fort Lauderdale. Police discovered D'Amore's body the day before Christmas Eve in 2024. His wife identified Milosevich as a family friend while watching the jewelry store surveillance footage, which appeared to show the 2 men entering the business together 3 days earlier. Only Milosevich was seen leaving, and he had some items in his hands when he walked out the door nearly 3 hours after arriving at the store. When questioned by police, he reportedly admitted to killing D'Amore after picking the elderly businessman up at his residence and going to dinner. According to a police report, Milosevich said he wanted to get his girlfriend jewelry for Christmas. He had paid D'Amore roughly $16,000 for a $20,000 Rolex watch before D'Amore got frustrated with his slow payments and raised the price. Milosevich claimed that D'Amore refused to let him get a different piece of jewelry in exchange for the money he had paid, leading to an argument between the 2 men. As he described hitting and choking D'Amore, Milosevich told police that the senior citizen didn't defend himself. After D'Amore became unresponsive, Milosevich fled the scene with around 20 pieces of jewelry and a video camera. He claimed he had thrown the items in a river, although it's unclear if this is true, and is currently being held without bail on a murder charge at the Broward County Jail. Number 17. Amir Johnson. 27-year-old Shakia Allen was mercilessly gunned down in broad daylight outside a Baltimore housing complex in April 2024, and the killing was captured on video, yet the murderer remains at large. In the footage, Allen could be heard reminding her ex-boyfriend, 24-year-old Amir Johnson, that she had a restraining order against him. Johnson challenged Allen to call the police and shot her several times while chasing her around the parking lot. Just moments before the gunfire broke out, a witness urged Johnson to leave Allen alone, but they were ultimately powerless to stop him from killing Allen, who collapsed onto the pavement and was pronounced dead at the scene. By the time police arrived at the scene, Johnson had fled. He remains at large to this day, stoking frustrations among Allen's family members as they try to understand why Johnson hasn't been captured yet. The shooting marked a tragic end to a volatile on and off relationship between the victim and the killer, who had a history of police-involved domestic disputes. According to Allen's family, Johnson became increasingly controlling throughout the relationship after initially hiding that side of himself and getting along well with Allen's loved ones. But as the toxicity worsened, Allen tried ending the relationship. Johnson was arrested at least twice for assaulting her in the months leading up to the murder and was just days away from going to trial when he went on the lam. Authorities have encouraged anyone with information to come forward and share what they know in hopes that Johnson will finally be located and brought to justice. Number 16. Travis Lofton. An ordinary work day took a deadly turn for restaurant manager Jason Mallette in June of 2023 when he was confronted by the enraged husband of one of his employees. Ariel Allen had allegedly told her husband, Travis Lofton, that Mallette had assaulted her. It wasn't true, but Lofton believed it was, and he sought justice on his own terms by fatally shooting Mallette outside his workplace in Bay Minette, Alabama. Surveillance footage showed Lofton arriving at the scene 2 hours prior to Mallette's shift and lying in wait outside the shopping center where the victim managed a Mediterranean cafe. In the video, Mallette and a co-worker could be seen walking toward the building, unaware that one of them was about to be murdered. Just moments later, the footage showed Lofton running away from the restaurant. He fled the scene in his pickup truck while Mallette succumbed to a single .40 caliber gunshot wound to the chest. During the investigation that followed, police uncovered phone records which revealed that Lofton and his wife had exchanged dozens of calls and text messages in the hours leading up to the shooting. In November 2024, Lofton was found guilty of murder. He faces up to 65 years in prison and is reportedly awaiting sentencing. And while the victim's loved ones and many members of the community are relieved by the verdict, there's a lingering sense of discontent over the complete absence of charges against Lofton's wife. Number 15. The murder of Shelbey Thornburgh. 20-year-old Shelbey Thornburgh was murdered inside her Houston high-rise apartment complex in November of 2015. Following the discovery of her body, police watched the building's surveillance footage for clues and saw a man coming and going from the slain young woman's apartment. The unnamed suspect, whose identity remains a mystery to this day, entered the building at around 9 p.m. and left less than an hour later. He was wearing sunglasses in an apparent attempt to conceal his identity, and it seems to have worked. The killer had also been using a non-traceable track phone on the night of the murder, and police believe he and Thornburgh had just met, further complicating investigators' efforts to identify and locate him. Nearly a decade later, authorities remain hopeful that the man will be brought to justice. All they need is a good lead to take them in the right direction, and anyone with information is encouraged to contact law enforcement or Crime Stoppers. Number 14. Colin Dudley. 33-year-old Cassandra Cantrell was 10 weeks pregnant when she vanished from the home she shared with her mother near Tacoma, Washington, in August of 2020. It was unlike her to disappear without explanation, and her family really began to panic when she failed to attend a prenatal checkup. During the 4-week search that ensued, police found Cantrell's car abandoned along a Tacoma street with the keys inside. The effort to locate the missing woman ended the month after she disappeared, when detectives located Cantrell's remains using surveillance footage, vehicle location data, and other evidence. They landed on the trail of Cantrell's ex-boyfriend and the father of her unborn child, 37-year-old Colin Dudley. And GPS data from Dudley's truck led to the location of Cantrell's body in a wooded ravine. Dudley was living with another woman who he had started dating after his previous relationship with Cantrell ended. Home security footage showed Cantrell's Mazda sedan leaving her neighborhood shortly before 8:30 a.m. on the day she was last seen alive. Investigators also tracked her cell phone pings to the waters off a small island in Puget Sound, where they found Cantrell's cell phone, and phone records revealed that Cantrell had gone to see Dudley at his house on the day she went missing. Both Cantrell and Dudley's phones had remained at the residence for several hours, yet when questioned by police, Dudley denied having any recent contact with Cantrell. Detectives' suspicions were heightened when they found a record of Dudley buying heavy-duty garbage bags before Cantrell drove to his house on the day of her murder. In the meantime, police watched surveillance footage from a nearby transit station and found video of the suspect walking away from the vehicle and down the station's platform. The man in the footage was wearing a black fedora, which Dudley was known to do, and the man in the video had the same gait and build as the suspect, who could be seen driving away in his pickup truck. In addition to having a living girlfriend, Dudley had previously told Cantrell he didn't want children, but he seemed surprisingly calm after learning that Cantrell was pregnant. and told her that they would talk soon. Dudley pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in 2022 and was sentenced to 26 years in prison, which means that he could see freedom again as soon as 2044. Number 13. Shannon Grant. In May of 2023, the concerned family of 40-year-old Natasha Maurice went to her flat in the English city of Leicester, where they looked through a window and saw 27-year-old Shannon Grant inside the home. Grant refused to answer the door, prompting the family to call law enforcement, and he escaped through a window as officers made entry into the residence. Police found Maurice's body under her bed. Her injuries indicated that she had been strangled and attacked, and Grant soon rose to the top of the suspect list. Chilling security video showed Grant tossing his jacket and bag near the victim's residence before fleeing the scene. In the footage, he could be seen talking on the phone while in possession of Maurice's bank card. Hours later, authorities tracked Grant to a relative's house in Coventry, where he was arrested on suspicion of murder. During his trial in early 2024, the defense argued that 5 unidentified men had broken into the residence and killed Maurice, but Grant's DNA was found on a zip tie that had been used to bind Maurice, and he had been captured purchasing the zip ties on surveillance footage the previous day. In February 2024, a jury found Grant guilty of murder. He was sentenced to a minimum of 34 years in prison for killing Maurice, who he had reportedly befriended after learning that the woman had recently received an inheritance. The two were drinking and taking drugs together when Grant fatally attacked Maurice. Motivated purely by greed, he used the slain woman's phone to ask her mother for $2,500 to pay a fine. The unusual nature of the request stoked the suspicions of Maurice's family, who summoned law enforcement. But it was too late to save Maurice, and Grant will now spend the majority of his adulthood behind bars. Number 12. John Shallerhorn. While attempting to attend a high school basketball game in New Orleans, Louisiana in 2021, 35-year-old John Shallerhorn got into an altercation with a school employee who denied him entry to the event because he wasn't wearing a COVID mask. The confrontation became physical, drawing the attention of 38-year-old Tulane police officer Martinez Mitchum, who was working security at the event. Mitchum intervened and led Shallerhorn into the parking lot, where Shallerhorn shot him twice before placing his gun on the ground. He surrendered peacefully to responding members of law enforcement and was booked into custody on suspicion of murder and armed robbery with a firearm. Shallerhorn pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and the case went to trial. During the proceedings, the defendant's mother and brother testified about sudden changes in his behavior several years earlier. In April 2024, a jury found Shallerhorn guilty of first-degree murder and robbery. He received a mandatory life sentence for the murder charge, plus 20 additional years for the weapon-related counts. Number 11. Taylor McIlvenna. Police in Northern Ireland encountered a heartbreaking scene at the North Belfast home of 30-year-old Shelbey Morgan in December 2021 when they found one of the woman's 4 children trying to comfort her lifeless body. She had been bludgeoned to death during what police described as an unprovoked attack at the hands of 33-year-old Taylor George McIlvenna, who already had a litany of prior arrests and convictions under his belt prior to the murder. After killing Morgan, McIlvenna used the deceased woman's phone to send several messages to her family members in an attempt to fool the victim's loved ones into believing she was still alive. But Morgan's mother eventually became concerned enough to go check on her daughter, who was found lying on the floor with blunt force injuries to the front and back of her head. McIlvenna initially maintained his innocence despite being seen leaving the home on doorbell camera footage, but he ultimately pleaded guilty to Morgan's murder and was sentenced to a minimum prison term of 17 years. Number 10. The murder of Donna Brown. In August of 2018, 79-year-old Donna Brown was found bleeding and motionless on the floor at an Alcoholics Anonymous building in Galveston, Texas, where she had been preparing for a meeting just a short while earlier. Emergency responders were summoned to the scene by a volunteer who had found Brown clinging to life in a doorway, and she still had a weak pulse when help arrived. Paramedics and EMTs initially suspected that Brown had fallen, but they realized she had been stabbed while cutting her shirt away in order to perform life-saving measures. Brown was placed in the intensive care unit at a local hospital, where she passed away from her injuries 3 days later. Brown's last moments alive were captured on video by a surveillance camera across the street, which recorded footage of the senior citizen entering the building shortly before 4 p.m. The killer was also in the footage, which showed a male figure clad in dark clothing entering the building from a side door 2 hours before Brown arrived to prepare for the meeting. In 2021, a detective assigned to the case told local station ABC 13 that she believed she had identified the killer, but that she needed more evidence in order to have a solid enough case to pursue charges. Speaking with a news outlet on the condition of anonymity, a male witness, Scott, said that he believed he had come face to face with the killer when he entered the building 26 minutes after the suspect was seen going in. The mysterious man, later identified as Ernest Pierre, was laying down on a cushioned bench. Scott recognized him as someone who occasionally attended meetings and was known for being aggressive, prompting him to leave and go elsewhere to avoid a confrontation. He later helped police identify Pierre, who was arrested on unrelated charges 2 days later. While taking the suspect into custody, police sprayed his sneakers with luminol and discovered a concerning amount of blood on the footwear. While serving a 15-year prison sentence for robbery the following year, Pierre was charged in the cold case murder of 66-year-old Melvin Walker, who had been found dead on a sidewalk from blunt force injuries. 44-year-old Pierre was also named as a person of interest in Brown's murder, but records show that he's currently only facing 1 murder charge, along with 3 counts of assault causing bodily injury. He's currently awaiting trial from behind bars at the Galveston County Jail. Number 9. Joseph Smith. In a case that sent shockwaves across the US in February 2004, a young schoolgirl named Carly Brucia was abducted in broad daylight while walking home from a friend's house in Sarasota, Florida. Surveillance footage from a nearby car wash showed a man later identified as 37-year-old Joseph P. Smith confronting Brucia and grabbing her by the arm before leading her to his vehicle nearby. Smith already had a lengthy rap sheet consisting of past charges for kidnapping, false imprisonment, drug-related offenses, and more. After identifying him as the prime suspect in Brucia's kidnapping, police discovered that he was already in custody elsewhere on an unrelated parole violation charge. Smith initially refused to speak to investigators but had an apparent change of heart after 4 days in custody when he agreed to lead police to Brucia's body. Her partially clothed remains had been dumped behind a local church, and an autopsy found that she was still alive when she endured a brutal assault at the hands of Smith, who then choked Brucia to death. In November 2005, Smith was found guilty on multiple counts including murder, kidnapping, and battery. The jury recommended capital punishment and Smith was remanded to death row, where he was still awaiting an execution date when he died in 2021 at the age of 55. Speaking to Fox 13 after Smith's death, Carly's father, Joseph Brucia, described feeling let down by the system due to the fact that Smith was on parole at the time of Carly's murder. Smith had violated his parole by using cocaine, which could have easily landed him back behind bars for up to 5 years, but he was instead sentenced to probation, leaving him free to wander the streets and prey on the innocent. Number 8. Brian Golsby. 21-year-old Ohio State University student Reagan Tokes was leaving her restaurant job in downtown Columbus on the night of February 8, 2017, when she was robbed and abducted at gunpoint. Her captor, later identified as a man in his 20s named Brian Lee Golsby, forced Tokes to drive to 2 ATMs where she attempted to withdraw money at his command. The transactions were declined and Golsby made Tokes drive to a nearby alleyway where he forced himself on the young woman and assaulted her. They later stopped at 2 gas stations and a 3rd ATM, where Tokes withdrew $60 for Golsby. From there, they proceeded to a park where Golsby shot Tokes twice in the head, execution style. Golsby left the victim's body at the scene and drove her car to his girlfriend's house, where he gave Tokes his wallet and Kate Spade purse to his girlfriend as gifts. He threw the murder weapon in a sewer and attempted to burn the stolen car in a bid to destroy evidence. A park goer discovered Stokes' body the following day. After locating her partially burned car, investigators found discarded cigarette butts containing Golsby's DNA. They also acquired an image which showed Golsby buying a black gas can that was found inside the car. Golsby was also tied to the crime through GPS location data and surveillance footage captured by the city's transit system, which showed him riding a bus just hours before the murder. In addition to being accused of killing Tokes, Golsby was connected to at least 6 other recent attacks in the area. He initially denied the murder while being questioned after his arrest, claiming he had forced Tokes to undress and drove off, leaving her behind at the park while she was still alive. When confronted with the evidence, Golsby offered a far-fetched narrative about how a man had forced him to assault Tokes at gunpoint. Police knew this was untrue but played along for the time being. While in pre-trial detention, Golsby confessed to being the killer to at least 2 people, including a friend and the mother of his child. During his trial, prosecutors accused him of killing Tokes to prevent her from reporting him for the other crimes he had committed against her in the hours leading up to the shooting. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life without parole after the jury failed to reach a unanimous decision about the death penalty. Number 7. Daniel Greene. 31-year-old volunteer firefighter John Hickey wasn't the type to go looking for trouble, but trouble came to him in December 2017 when he was mercilessly gunned down inside his Baltimore home. At the time, he had been dating a woman named Jennifer McKay for about a month, and McKay had recently ended a relationship with a married man named Daniel Greene. McKay had called police for a welfare check at Hickey's home after he stopped responding to her over the phone and didn't come to the door when she stopped by at his apartment to check on him. After learning about McKay's recent split from Greene, investigators began to look at Greene as a person of interest. He had been described by others as jealous, obsessive and possibly dangerous, further piquing detectives' suspicions. Surveillance footage captured outside Hickey's apartment building appeared to show Greene breaking into the residence on the night of the murder. He left 15 minutes later, and McKay was able to identify him as the man in the security video. A search of Greene's laptop revealed that he had followed Hickey and McKay's relationship to an almost obsessive degree, and he was charged with Hickey's murder. The murder weapon was never found, but prosecutors seemed confident in their ability to secure a conviction against Greene, who was found guilty on all counts including first-degree murder, home invasion, and firearm use in a felony violent crime. Numerous people called for the death penalty, but Greene was sentenced to life without parole plus 20 years. Number 6. Erik Bertelsen. Police in West Valley City, Utah, encountered a horror scene on New Year's Day in 2025 when they responded to a disturbing 911 call at a local residence. The caller could be heard screaming before going silent while the dispatcher was asking questions, and the officers who visited the home quickly figured out why. After initially knocking on the front door, the cops rushed over to a basement entrance with their body cameras rolling. Inside, 35-year-old Erik Bertelsen was stabbing his parents. Officers repeatedly ordered him to drop the weapon and show his hands, with one officer threatening to shoot Erik if he failed to obey orders. Erik refused to put down the weapon and was fatally shot by law enforcement. His parents, 67-year-old Kerry Bertelsen and 63-year-old Terry Bertelsen, were also pronounced dead at the scene. While it's unclear what led up to the double murder, Erik had a lengthy criminal history. Just days earlier, he had been arrested after he was seen running down the road in his underwear while high on methamphetamine. He also had 2 prior aggravated assault convictions, which he had served jail time for, as well as a kidnapping conviction for holding his girlfriend captive in 2020. Erik's obituary described him as a kind and loving man, leaving out any mention of his violent actions and instead focusing on his hobbies and better times with his family. Number 5. Devonte Douglas. In December 2021, a Youngstown, Ohio woman named Judith Britton was abducted at gunpoint by her ex-boyfriend, 25-year-old Devonte Douglas, when she went to pick up their son from his house. The kidnapping was captured on surveillance video, which showed a masked Douglas charging at Britton. He could be seen removing some items from the trunk and forcing Britton inside. Douglas drove to Hubbard Township and made Britton text her location to Adriana Hasley Crockett. When Hasley Crockett pulled up in her vehicle, Douglas shot her dead and then drove back to Youngstown. Once she was sure that Douglas was gone from the immediate area, Britton drove back to the scene and found Hasley Crockett dead. Douglas was arrested later that day when he went to the police station to pick up a vehicle that had been towed. In the meantime, investigators spoke with Britton, who explained that Douglas had been trying to get back together with her for a long time and was angry that she had started dating Hasley Crockett. In September 2022, Douglas pleaded guilty to aggravated murder, abduction, and tampering with evidence. He was sentenced to 26 years to life in prison, and Hasley Crockett's family said they plan to attend every single parole hearing and fight to keep him behind bars. Number 4. Scott Jones. In June of 2018, 44-year-old Deborah DePinton was found unresponsive and foaming at the mouth in the laundry room of a Boulder, Colorado trailer park office. Her husband, 48-year-old Scott Jones, was hysterical when law enforcement arrived at the scene. He claimed that DePinto had accidentally fallen and injured herself, and officers encouraged him to try remaining calm while EMTs attempted to revive his wife. They were unable to resuscitate DePinto, who was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital, and her injuries indicated that she had met with foul play, contrary to what Jones had told the police. Officers spoke with the couple's daughter, Mary, who said that her parents had been arguing earlier that day, and while it was nothing new for the couple to bicker, Mary said that this particular disagreement sounded more serious than a typical argument. Neighbors and other acquaintances spoke highly of DePinto, who often worked multiple jobs as a chef to support the family, but they had less kind things to say about Jones, who was described as a hothead who lacked impulse control. The marriage had been on the rocks for quite some time, and Jones had moved out of the family home and into the trailer parks just weeks before DePinto's murder. The truth about DePinto's death was revealed through audio and video recordings captured by a hidden surveillance camera inside the park's office. In the footage, Jones and DePinto could be seen entering the office during a heated argument. In an exchange that occurred off camera but within earshot of the device, DePinto told Jones that she no longer wanted to be with him. She could also be heard saying, "You can't force me to love you anymore," and telling Jones to stop blocking the doorway. Just a moment or two later, she let out a terrified scream. This was the moment when Jones strangled DePinto to death, according to prosecutors, accusing Jones of flying into a rage when DePinto refused to let him control her like he had for many years leading up to that point. Instead of seeking help after he lost his temper and attacked his wife, Jones spent nearly an hour in the laundry room, presumably trying to think of a way to cover up his actions. He was found guilty of second-degree murder in December 2019 and sentenced to up to 48 years in prison. Records show that he'll become eligible for parole in 2053 at the age of 83, but he could remain in prison until 2065, which means that there's a good chance he'll spend the rest of his life there. Number 3. Maurice Stewart. Early one morning in June of 2017, 40-year-old Maurice Stewart murdered his friend, 40-year-old Jevon Mora, outside a Detroit nightclub in cold blood. He then fled the scene, where Mora was pronounced dead at 3:09 a.m. According to police, Stewart lay in wait outside the building just minutes after he was seen talking with Mora and a group of other club goers in the parking lot. The murder was captured on surveillance video, which showed Stewart approaching Mora on the sidewalk and shooting him multiple times at point-blank range. By the time police arrived, he was long gone from the scene. During an interview with local news station WXYZ, Deputy U.S. Marshal Aaron Garcia described Stewart as a smart killer who knew what he had to do in order to cover his tracks. The fleeing fugitive had a lengthy rap sheet with prior convictions for drug and gun-related offenses, as well as violent crimes including involuntary manslaughter. At the time of Mora's murder, he was wanted by the FBI for federal charges out of northern Ohio. Stewart was captured in Ohio 3 months after the shooting. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison for his federal case, which included drug trafficking and gun charges. In 2019, he was formally charged in Michigan with first-degree premeditated murder, firearms possession by a felon, and a felony firearm. Updates on Stewart's state charges have not been forthcoming, leaving the outcome of the case unclear. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, and maybe it will be your video that we'll be doing next. Number 2. The murder of Darrell Tezeno. In May of 2021, footage of a fatal shooting in Houston, Texas went viral on social media. 24-year-old U.S. Army veteran Darrell Tezeno was killed outside an apartment complex while trying to break up a fight between two women, one of whom was his cousin. In the video, Tezeno could be seen standing between the two women. Once the fight was over, one of the women went on Instagram Live and accused Tezeno of pushing her. He was shot dead just moments later by someone who believed the woman's claims. Speaking to Fox 26 in the shooting's aftermath, activist Quanell X said that Tezeno didn't put his hands on anyone and that he was killed for trying to do the right thing. A week after his death, the news outlet reported that no arrest had been made despite there being numerous witnesses to the crime. There have been no further updates on the case, which presumably remains unsolved. Number 1. The murder of Andrew Foster. Late one night in August of 2023, two men approached the home of 26-year-old Andrew Foster in Gateshead, England, and knocked on the front door. When Foster answered, the men sprayed him in the face with ammonia. They proceeded to ransack the house before fleeing the scene, and Foster was rushed to the hospital as he struggled to breathe. He died from his injuries, and police began their efforts to track down the killers. Relying extensively on surveillance footage and phone records, investigators identified a group of drug dealers who were linked to at least 3 recent attacks with corrosive substances. According to police, 3 assaults were carried out on rival dealers for the purposes of intimidating the victims and stealing their supply. Almost immediately after Foster's murder, 2 of the suspects, John Wandless and Kenneth Fawcett, were seen buying snacks on surveillance footage from a nearby gas station. The men seemed perfectly calm and pleasant as they debated what they were going to buy, and they were seen driving off in a Volkswagen sedan that they later set on fire in a bid to destroy evidence. Wandless, Fawcett, and their 2 co-conspirators, Yusuf Wynn and Josh Hawthorne, were found guilty of murder in 2024 and sentenced to life with minimum terms ranging from 22 to 33 years. Thanks for watching. Would you rather never be able to take photos with your phone again or never be able to text with it? And why? Let us know in the comments below.